Welcome to the Poetry Flash reading series, the last event of 2021. I'm Joyce Jenkins, coming to you from Poetry Flash in Berkeley. Tonight we are pleased to present a reading by Jack Foley, performing with Sangye Land and Deborah Bachels Schmidt. This reading is co-sponsored by Mo's Books in Berkeley. You can purchase Jack Foley's books at our online bookshop that Mo's has set up for us, bookshop.org/lists, LIST/poetry-flash-readings. To purchase Deborah Schmidt's new book, see the Orchard Street Press website, and the link is in the chat box. You'll find them, and if you want to find them after the reading, they'll be on the Facebook event page for this event. You are muted on entry. Please keep yourself muted during the reading. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the Poetry Flash Facebook page and YouTube channel. After the reading, after the recording is stopped, we'll keep the Zoom on for a few minutes so those who are joining us live can ask a question or say hello. Please remember to visit poetryflash.org to see reviews and news about upcoming events in California. To join our email list, please go to poetryflash.org. Our first reader is Deborah Bachels Schmidt's brand new chat book. Her brand new chat book is Stumbling into Grace. Diane Frank said, "In these pandemic times, the world needs poems that provide vision, joy, and grace. Stumbling into Grace by Deborah Bachels Schmidt provides this kind of elixir. From the first poem to the narrative arc of her book, we receive a mythology of our times, full of ancient wisdom. A Pushcart Prize nominee, she's also the author of The Milky Breath of Stars poems, a memoir about growing up in Taos, land of my enchantment, a children's book, and 2 genealogical adventures, the Bible, the Ship, and the Pewter Plate, and the Menorah in the Closet. She was awarded first prize in the sonnet category by the Soul Making Keats literary competition. Her poems have appeared in Blue Unicorn, California Quarterly, the Lyric, the Phrastic Review, and more. And Jack Foley is going to make a cameo appearance in her reading, so watch for that. Please welcome Deborah Bachels Schmidt.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Joyce, and thanks to Poetry Flash and to Rosalinda, who's doing tech tonight, and to Jack Foley also for this invitation to share this reading with him. And it's lovely to see so many friends here tonight. Welcome, welcome, and thank you for coming. I'm going to begin with the title poem of this little book, which is called Stumbling into Grace. Such a clumsy child, they said, especially after that big growth spurt when the mapping of my feet and hands became such a mystery to me. It was years before I was at home in my body again, and only rarely, even then, did I truly feel graceful. But looking back, my life seems to be one big graceful stumble. Graceful with a hyphen, that is, and 2 L's. How else can I explain just happening to be there for the 2 girls twirling on the grass, or the moon falling across the night? If I spend the rest of my days practicing gratitude, it will never be enough for this stumbling into grace. Thank you. And this next one is called The Apricot Tree, which I just have to read because this may be the night when this beautiful little tree loses all of its amazing leaves. The apricot tree. Look now and see, vibrant with light on this December morning. The apricot in all its lucent glory, each leaf aglow against rain-burnished bark. One last night wind, and every leaf will leave its tender mooring to lie on the ground in a perfect circle, fallen like Zeus to Danae in the dark. Losing the apricot. The arborist, our neighbor's son, our daughter's childhood friend, now grown with an easy competence and young ones of his own, broke to us the bad news about our beloved apricot. The canker is deep, so we cannot save the tree. It may survive a year or two, or it may go quickly. The way it continues to leaf and to bud, to bear its blushing, succulent fruit, to turn radiant gold each autumn, to live despite mortal illness in beauty and symmetry, holding back nothing, breaks my heart. And the next poem is actually the one that inspired the cover art for the book, which my daughter Pilar Schmidt did. And I'm just going to hold this up so you can see. Swainson's Hawks. On a still, bright October day, I am walking an El Sobrante ridge under a vaporless blue sky as crisp as wine. Suddenly, over my head, I see a single hawk spiraling on the thermals. There is another, then a third, until there are 6, all riding the updrafts in faultless circles, ruled by the avian aerodynamics of lift over weight and angle over drift. As I watch, one passes within inches of my upturned face, and I hear the feathery beat of its wings. I can see its creamy underside and dark flight feathers. These are Swainson's hawks on their long way to Argentina for the winter, and I have just been brushed with the majesty of their passage. Now I remember to breathe. The next poem is not in the book, but I really wanted to read it tonight. It's called Transfiguration. I am torn awake by a desperate small cry, the cry of a living thing suddenly confronting death, a shriek of protest, of disbelief, the mortal scream of a creature otherwise almost never heard. The cry comes again, fading toward the tall cedar where the great horned owl has taken over a raven's nest. She must find good hunting here, where we give haven to a family of bushy-tailed wood rats. With each repetition, the cry seems to grow in resignation, acceptance, until finally there is a faint, garbled squeak, and all is still once more. I begin to say a prayer for the end of this life, and then I realize the wood rat is becoming owl, this tiny being never far from the earth, its pale, soft belly full of our fallen apricots, its naked paws so much like human hands, becoming moon-eyed vigilance and silent flight, a brush of tiger feathers in the night. One of my passions is genealogy. And for a person of Jewish heritage, genealogy can be extremely challenging because often records are lost. So this poem is about that. It's called Recipe for a Lost History. Dissolve at least 3,000 years of Jewish heritage, the name of the shtetl, how to sing the Moda Ani, how to make challah, where to find grandfather's grave. In one interreligious marriage, her carpet bag is packed. When she hears his violin under her window, she will slip down the back stairs in her stocking feet. She knows her father will disown her. Stir in 10 children, 1 world war. 14 Levy's sons and cousins fight under the British flag. Staff Sergeant Claude Levy escorts the king through the Belgian firing lines. Add 2 decades of rising anti-Semitism. In 1921, the London Times debunks the protocols of the Elders of Zion, but still thousands believe that Jews conspire to control the world. Change the names of almost all the children. The girls lose their surnames in marriage. William and Hubert become Beaumonts, Cecil, Adélie. Harold and Leopold Levy reinvent themselves as Dewar Montague and Stanley Vivian. Scatter them across the 7 seas. Hubert joins the Merchant Marine. Cecil is a peripatetic vaudeville actor. Music hall artiste Dewar sails for South Africa. And William and Phyllis come to San Francisco to form 10 new families. Let ferment for 2 generations before shaking with 1 more world war. The London night is split by searchlights and sirens. A shadowy Heinkel births its deadly payload over the great synagogue. Flames taste the edges of a grandmother's marriage record. Add a Holocaust. How many Polish and German cousins, Fox, Summerfields, Solomons, and Levys who stay behind are lost in the camps. Make sure all records are destroyed. This next one is also not in the book. It was inspired by an actual archaeological find on the island of Crete. And I sent it to the archaeologist, Anagnostis Argelarakis, who shared it with his wife, Argi Mutafis, who's a wonderful visual artist. And she is actually working on a painting based on the poem, which is just a great reversal of the usual ekphrastic process. So this one is called Bones of the Potter. For 3,000 years, her bones have lain at Eleftherna, becoming intertwined with olive roots. Hers are not the bones of a priestess, symmetrical and pristine. They show hard and singular use, muscles on the right more developed, knees and hips smoothed to ivory. Anthropologists tried to read her story, but even digital magic could not model a way of life that sculpted such bones. She had not been a laundress or a weaver, a reaper or a baker of bread. A chance encounter with a living Cretan ceramicist solved the riddle. Kicking a wheel taxed those joints, leaning to shape the spinning clay built those muscles. A potter of the Homeric age, she threw piti, vessels as tall as a man used for grain and wine, but also burials. She would have been part of a thriving city of the living who tended to the needs of the dead, grave diggers, flower sellers, stone cutters, weavers of shrouds. She would always have worked with others whose hands joined hers to lift, center, raise, and fire such colossal amounts of clay. Close your eyes against the white Cretan sun. Breathe in wild thyme. Taste the earthiness of moist terracotta. The lapis air rings with the sistra of cicadas. There she is, under an awning, centering beehives of clay twice her own weight. She opens a well in the mound, a daily act of love and creation, and the pitos begins to rise, silky, grainy, cool to her touch, fluid in form, responsive to every message from her hands. She throws one enormous layer and then another, carefully sealing them together, leaving no pockets of air to explode in the kiln. She feeds the fire with crushed olive stones and grape seeds until it glows like a sliced persimmon. Perhaps she never imagined she would be a storyteller, but the story written on her bones has survived millennia to reach us, connecting us across the centuries, making of time a circle as true as the rim of the rising clay. Thank you. And I'm going to return to the book now for a small suite of musically inspired poems. This first one is called Gradus Ad Parnassum. And the title actually means steps to Parnassus, Parnassus being the mountain sacred to Apollo and Dionysius, and also the home of the Muses. So because of the meaning of the title, it was used for centuries as the title of books on Latin poetry, and then later became a title for a musical method book, several musical method books, and also collections of instructional pieces. So this is Gradus Ad Parnassum, a Cestina on scales. She lifts the lid, rests fingers on the keys, and then begins her practice with a scale, this time D major, followed by its chords. She bridges to the relative minor, B. The two keys merge into a grander one, the realm of two sharps, free enough to hold a world of colors in one embracing whole. She knows that daily practice is the key, that if she makes this alphabet her own, much else can follow. Every simple scale reveals more patterns. Every chord can be another door that opens. There's a chord that draws her, guides her through each shining chord into the heart of music, where the whole of life is held. She knows she'll never be a virtuoso. Something lower key, the role of amateur, is more in scale with the quiet life she chooses as her own. She tries to keep in mind the words that one beloved teacher, modest to his core, once shared with her, that on the larger scale, comparisons she's tempted to uphold are meaningless. Humility is key. However well she plays, there will always be a better player, as there will always be another less adept. Her skills, hard won, must bring their own reward. They are the key from which she now embarks, an open score, her only map. And such a map. Behold its runic signs, the staves, the notes that scale the staves, the signatures for time and scale, the potent rests for rests are forged to be the signs of silence. Last of all, behold the clefs, the signs that translate every one the notes upon the page and make each score a roman à clé, for clef means clue or key. So she begins again with just one scale, with chords she has played so many times before. And in her heart, she knows she holds the key. Thank you. This next one is, well, as many of you know, I used to be a pretty serious flute player, but I have set it aside in favor of poetry. And this poem is an imagining of what that renunciation might mean to the instrument. Lament of the flute. What will happen to me when she clicks the case closed for the last time? I wonder now, because she leaves me idle for days sometimes. For years, we have not been as inseparable as we were. And while her fingers seem as sure as ever, her sound is not as free. I do miss being kept warm for hours, vibrant with her breath. Oh, the music we made, the dizzy leaps, the fleet runs, the round low tones, the tender pianissimos. I will always remember the Pulank cantilena, each note like moonlight on water. When the case snaps shut, I will lie silent in my blue velvet, waiting. I suppose I will be sent away to be overhauled and polished before being sold. My action will be aligned and eased, my pads seated perfectly, my luster restored. I was bespoke for her, you know, my head joint hand cut, my tubing rolled thin at her request. And all my life, I have answered faithfully with all my silver heart to every signal of her touch and tongue. How strange it will be to answer to other hands, other lips, other songs, another soul than hers. The next one is Prelude in C major. It's based on a very familiar to many of you, I'm sure, little C major Bach prelude, BWV 846. It's written as 2 sonnets bridged by a 7-line poem, also in iambic pentameter. And the secret to the poem is there are exactly as many lines as there are measures in the piece. Prelude in C major. The first 4 measures of this little prelude are a microcosm of all that is to come, a nearly perfect self-sufficient etude, a journey to the dominant and home. Already Bach has set his constant texture of 16ths rising in arpeggios. The chords reveal and fold into each other, always hinging on their common tones, perhaps just 1, but sometimes even 3, and never dancing far on a single breath, yet somehow compassing the space between this earth and heaven, or from birth to death. For so this prelude, in its compact grace, does hold a world entire in its embrace. I wonder if, in his secure belief, Bach conjured, as he wrote, the Shepherd's Psalm, the 23rd, which opens, like this piece, beside still waters in a realm of calm, and travels through the valley of the shadow, ever comforted by staff and rod, to end serenely in the house of God. For if I had to choose one favorite measure, it would have to be bar 23, where all the notes are folded close together, coiled as tight and potent as a seed. And this, which holds such possibility, just happens to immediately precede the pedal point, 8 bars of harmony in grand, voluptuous flowering over G. The pedal is long for such a compact piece, and earthly time becomes merely a portal into infinity. The pedal G, the sure, sustaining hand of the immortal, bearing us homeward to the mother key, as Bach's great river courses to the sea. Thank you, everyone. Well, as many of you know, I am the quintessential homebody. I have been very happy during the pandemic. I do love to travel, but I've really tried not to because of the carbon imprint. But I do a lot of armchair traveling. And this next poem, Sky Lanterns, was inspired by one of those armchair visitations. The Yiping Festival of Lanterns in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Dusk deepens and the full moon flames white in a soft aura. In the company of hundreds, all carrying Khom Loi, she walks with her lover toward the Narawat Bridge. On their young skin, the air weighs moist and warm, sweet with incense, full of music and voices. They stop to write a prayer on their lantern, people flowing around them. The crowd comes to rest at the night market near the temple. Holding the paper shell by its bamboo rim, they kindle the waxy ring and wait for the magical moment when the air inside heats to buoyancy and the lantern pulls out of their gentle grasp to lift moonward, joining the countless others that drift past the temple spires, golden against the black of sky. Rising vertically at first, they lose momentum and are taken by a slow current that makes them swim together like phosphorescent fish across the darkness. Dwindling as they recede, they become a constellation, then a galaxy, the radiance and hope that each one of us always carries, now made visible. And our next reading I will be joined by Jack. We discovered that we had both translated the same Baudelaire poem, Recueillement, and Jack turned the pair of translations into a dual translation with our lines alternating. The original was written in rhymed Alexandrines, or lines of 12 syllables. Jack's translation rhymes. Mine does not attempt to rhyme, but it does use hexameter, which is the English equivalent of the Alexandrines. The dual translation really amplifies the facets of the translation, the many branching choices facing the translator. So Jack will read his lines and I'll read mine.
Be good, oh my sorrow. Calm down.
Be wise, oh my sorrow, and keep yourself more calm.
You'll want it evening. Here it comes. It's here.
You clamored for evening. See, it's falling. Here it is.
A dark atmosphere enfolds the town.
A gloomy atmosphere envelops the entire town.
Brings peace to some, to others care.
To some it carries peace, to others care and worry.
While the vile multitude of mortals,
while among the mortals the vile multitude,
under the whip of pleasure, that merciless butcher,
Under the lash of pleasure, hangmen without mercy,
Sets out to gather remorse in slavish revels.
goes to reap remorse in the servile feast.
My sorrow, give me your hand. Let's go over here.
Oh, my sorrow, give to me your hand, come here.
Away from them. See where the defunct years lean.
Far from them, see the late years leaning down.
On the balconies of the sky in superannuated gowns.
From balconies of sky, dressed in antique robes.
Where regret leaps up from the depths of the waters, smiling.
See smiling regret rising from the depths.
Where under an arch, the moribund sun sleeps sound.
The dying sun falling asleep beneath an arch.
And like dragging from the east, a long shroud.
And like a long shroud trailing from the east.
Listen, darling, listen to the sweet night coming.
Hear, my dear one, hear the footfalls of sweet night. Thank
Merci.
you, Jack.
So yesterday, yeah, it was one time.
And I'm going to end my set with my birthday poem for Jack, written when he turned 81 last August. For Jack at 81. 81 is a magical number, the sixth perfect totient, heptagonal, 9 times 9, the fourth power of 3, the roundness of the triple trinity squared. It is the atomic number of thallium, the number of squares on a shogi board, divinations in the Tai Chuan Jing, stanzas in the Tao Te Ching, or repetitions of the rosary. 81 is a southern interstate, a bakery in Sonoma, now defunct, the chosen number of the Hells Angels, H and A being the 8th and 1st letters, the international phone code for Japan, a Miles Davis track, a Mendelssohn Capriccio, a Dvorak quintet, and 2 spiral galaxies. The 81st meridian springs from the pole and passes through North America, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Pacific, and the Southern Ocean. Crossing the heart of Antarctica, it traverses the other side of the globe through Sri Lanka, the Indian Ocean, Nepal, India, Tibet, China, Kazakhstan, Russia, and the Kara Sea. In the beginning of our lives, a year can be half a lifetime. The years accelerate as they become smaller and smaller divisions of our span. Yet, thanks to time's elasticity, we are still given these infinite moments, sun igniting the rim of your glass as you sit in the garden speaking of Mallarmé. 81 is 180 reversed, the opposite of an about face, a symbol for facing forward, which you model with such grace. You are living the 81st Psalm, proven at the waters, answered in the secret place of thunder. You make a joyful noise and sing aloud unto God your strength. Thank you so much, everyone.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Deborah. Lovely.
Thank you, Joyce.
Our next reader, of course, Jack Foley. Jack Foley will perform with Sangye Land. His new book of poetry is When Sleep Comes, Shillelagh Songs. Micah Zevin said, Foley's When Sleep Comes, Shillelagh Songs is a collection that speaks multitudes, gives voice and voices to the human condition in all its tragic and celebratory facets, compels us to keep singing until the last song is sung. His other new books are the companion volumes, The Light of Evening, which is an autobiography of his life, and A Backward Glance or Traveled Roads, an autobiography of the octogenarian's poet's mind. So one is of the life and one is of the mind. Companion volumes. So anyway, it's fascinating, really. And then he has a previous poetry collection called Grief Songs, dealing with the sorrow at Adele's, his wife's, death. Foley has in total published 17 books of poetry. It's astounding. 5 books of criticism, a book of stories, and a 1,300-page chrono encyclopedia. Visions and Affiliations, California Poetry, 1940 to 2005. With Adele, his late wife, he became known for his multi-voiced choruses, a practice he has continued with Sangye Land, his new life partner, who's with us tonight. He's a contributing editor to Poetry Flash. And he does an amazing job. His essays and reviews grace our pages. Currently, we are featuring his essay on the late poet Al Young. It's a beautiful piece if you haven't seen it yet. Jack has presented poetry programs on KPFA radio in Berkeley since 1988 and is currently one of the hosts of KPFA's Cover to Cover show. This is a man whose erudition does cover 2 galaxies.
Thank you, Joyce.
And I'm so grateful to be with us tonight. So Jack Foley.
Thank you so much. Maybe I shouldn't read. I mean, that's sort of, I don't know if I can live up to all that, and especially Deborah's poem. 81st Galaxy, I mean, the Psalms. I'll do what I can. Well, thanks to Joyce Jenkins, who is definitely indefatigable. And Sangye and I are delighted to be reading with Deborah, who is an immensely talented poet and musician as well. The recent books I've published are complex and diverse and not easily excerpted. Instead, I'm going to read you a longish poem that covers some of the issues covered in the books. As I say in the poem, my writing is extremely varied, but the task is not to unify these variations. The task is to find a structure which can contain them all. The task is not to lose any. Here is rat talk. I'm half Irish and half Italian. My 2 favorite poets are Yeats and Dante.
I lost my faith, but I still have my Bagora.
Eyes, yes.
The famous poet went on and on about how difficult it was to achieve this poem. He tried once and it failed, tried again, failed, etc. I wondered whether he shouldn't take up another line of work.
Poetry should be a pleasure, not a task.
These socks are on their last legs.
I'm as much a wronger as a writer. Some is well. What if the search to discover mind is self-defeating because mind doesn't exist? What if mind is a term made up out of a puritanical impulse to separate thinking from the body, but has no actual existence? We say mind thinks, but if mind doesn't exist, this statement is meaningless. The statement nevertheless creates a false dualism because the moment we say mind, we oppose it to body. What if thinking is an activity of the body, like walking or peeing?
What if thinking is an activity of the body, like walking or peeing?
What I'm saying doesn't imply that trying to discover mind is a fruitless endeavor. Like Columbus, you may discover all kinds of things in the effort to discover mind. just that if mind is a fictional entity, nothing but a verbal construct, you won't discover mind because it isn't.
To put it another way, what if mind is only a kind of medium, the way paint is a medium, the means by which an activity can take place?
We have a capacity to think as we have a capacity to walk, but we don't necessarily have a mind in the way that we have legs. We have a brain, yes, and it's part of our body, but not a mind.
When I hear people say that poetry is essentially speech, basically an oral art, I wonder about all that concrete poetry. Poetry like E. Cummings' Grasshopper, poetry that can't be spoken. Isn't that poetry?
I used to be 6'7" before we had a child.
Before I took up poetry. A mango is a peach that died and went to heaven.
It is possible, even after all these years, that Plato was wrong.
When I wrote film criticism, I wasn't interested in telling people whether a film were good or bad. I was interested in finding out what I was doing there in the dark.
Revision is addition, not subtraction. Picture me as a line of chorus girls. We're all tap dancing, and we need to get off the stage for the next act to come on. So we're given a traveling step. The most famous traveling step of all time is Shuffle Off to Buffalo.
Jack demonstrates, leaves the room.
No influence. I'd already been settled into what I was doing, but the discovery of an almost totally unknown and totally forgotten master, the quality of the work was no guarantee of fame.
No one has heard of him, whereas compared to him, more or less mediocre poets are in everyone's consciousness.
Never a poem in the New Yorker.
Never any students to spread the word. No other poet singing his praises.
The sheer loneliness of his work is stunning. He must have thought that someone would pick up on it. Work of this quality won't simply vanish.
Yet that is exactly what it did.
Timor mortis conturbat me.
After dinner, why is Jack like Trigger?
Because he's stuffed.
If you don't have any place better to go, you can always go to the bathroom.
The secret to a happy relationship is, yes, dear.
Yes, dear.
Timor mortis conturbat me. The tough guys in Brooklyn still say D's and do's for these and those. The Greek words for God and goddess are theos and thea.
The Roman words are deus and dea.
The Romans were tough guys too.
Yes, we were, says William Fasolino.
As for individualism, the term goes back to the Latin individuus, which means not divided. I have no problem if the term is used in a political sense, as in the rights of the individual. But if it is used to describe what is going on in my head, psyche, then it seems to me nonsensical. I'm as divided as I can be, so I'm not an individual, not individuous.
What I think I am is a multiplicity. It is the damaging propaganda of capitalism, of consumerism, that persuades people that they are individuals.
If people really were individuals, separate, different, then Madison Avenue would have no power over them. And it has immense power over them.
Trump's followers, who believe his lies, believe themselves to be individuals. That is the true blossoming of consumerism.
These days, capitalism depends to a considerable extent on finding hidden persuaders, subliminal elements that convince people to buy things they neither need nor want. What happens to your, I'm free not to buy something, in that situation?
You can find these persuaders even in the realm of popular song. For a song to be popular, it has to be remembered. Who can forget a song that begins with the command,
"You must remember this"?
Many other examples. Popular songs are in the realm of capitalism too. You have to buy them, and we measure value not in terms of life-changing experiences, but in terms of sales, a million seller.
Poetry, they tell us, doesn't sell, but perhaps that's an advantage. Rilke tells us that the point of art is to change your life. Du musst dein Leben ändern.
Belief in choice is an assertion of good Protestant values, values which go very well with capitalism. Back in the day, if a priest and an Irishman were walking on a hill and the priest asked the name of the hill, the Irishman might well have said, "That hill is sacred to Bridget, our red-headed goddess of fire, the hearth, poetry." "Good," says the priest, "she'll be Saint Bridget now."
That is precisely the kind of thing that the Protestants were protesting. The presence in Christianity of pagan elements, elements like the Christmas tree, against the Catholic impulse to be inclusive, to be Catholic. The Protestants insisted on choice, on either or, in Kierkegaard's phrase. This is why the Protestants invented divorce, individual choice inserted into the institution of marriage, and why the great Protestant poem is Paradise Lost, a poem which is all about a wrong choice.
Consumerism creates a kind of metaphysics of individuality and choosing, affirming individuality or ego by choosing. It's not that choice doesn't exist, but that it is far less extensive than it is given credit for being. It may well be that what we represent to ourselves as choices are nothing but the promptings of a situation which in fact determines why we move in one direction or another. Isn't that the lesson of Freud and others?
What about the concept of fate? Perhaps fate is one's situation. If one ceases to believe passionately in individuality, which doesn't mean that one therefore begins to believe passionately in the opposite of individuality, the crowd, then having to choose one thing rather than another becomes far less important. Consumerism loves choosing. Buy this rather than that. But choice may be damaging. Why not both and rather than either or? Why not an entirely new arrangement of possibilities? Assertions that certain things are best arise out of this emphasis on choosing. The best is the chosen one. What if there is no best? What kind of poetry arises out of a consciousness opposed to individuality and to choosing? Choose.
People. Some Greece is natural.
Some Greece is acquired.
Yoda knows all about the Force, but has yet to master elementary English grammar.
Stupid am I? The most difficult thing about a poetry reading is getting out of the room after it.
KPFA, how do you spell that?
THAT.
I sometimes think that if you didn't have self-pity, you couldn't have popular songs.
Every modern convenience tends to isolate people in their houses. COVID-19 has accelerated this process.
The silence and whiteness of the page.
Speaking of Larry Eigner, Michael McClure said, "It's like a Martian consciousness."
Scone like done, scone like stone.
Basil Bunting's complaints about the barbarous American pronunciation, scone like stone.
Hutch sings telephone like done.
Or telephone that rings, but who's to answer? There is God, there is heaven, and there's chai.
Not necessarily in that order.
You want to know how to start a religion? Find something people really like to do. Call it a sin. You have a religion. Tell them they will die. Tell them you can save them from death and from the horrible consequences of death. But tell them you will only save them from death if they do as you say.
Breasts, madam.
Collage has been called by Jerome Rothenberg and others the art form of the 20th century. And collage by its very nature moves against the idea of private property.
Did T.S. Eliot ask permission of all the people he quoted in The Wasteland?
Not collage, collision.
The disease of choosing.
Language is what you do with your lung. Writing is not language.
The ancient Greeks, seeing lightning, hearing thunder, would have attributed it to Zeus. We know that Zeus Potter never existed except in a communal imagination, so the attribution is wrong.
But the thunder and lightning were real. The thunder and lightning were real. These writers are in paper bags. Some of the paper bags are more substantial than others, but they're all in paper bags. Not one of them has a new idea about the art. Not one of them can write his way out of a paper bag.
A thought about voices and characters. Both Pound and Eliot were reading Browning. Browning creates various voices, but it is always one voice per poem.
Both Pound and Eliot get the idea of writing a single poem in which there are various voices rather than only one. This creates disturbing issues about selfhood and the notion of unity for both of them.
Eliot actually claims in a note that The Wasteland is, like Browning's work, a dramatic monologue, that the entire poem is spoken by Tiresias. This is possible, says Eliot, because Tiresias is both male and female, so he can be all the voices of the poem.
But this explanation falls to pieces when you realize that Tiresias is not both young and old, and there are young and old voices in Eliot's poem. Worse, Eliot also believes that his discovery of multiple voices means that he is a playwright. His plays are demonstrations that this is not the case. He is not creating a poem of various characters as a playwright creates various characters in a play. The interplay of voices in The Wasteland is not the interplay of characters. Eliot is responding to, creating an objective correlative and equivalent to the various voices and contexts constantly present in his mind.
Denunciations of our society are easy enough to make. There is a lot in our society that requires denouncing. But unless the denouncer cops to some sort of complicity, the denunciations carry with them a strong egoistic element.
The real subject of such screeds is not the society they're supposedly denouncing, but the self-satisfaction one feels at being totally in the right. The text is the horrors of society, which everyone knows about. But the subtext is the ego gratification of the speaker. Denunciatory poems are popular for that reason. The audience experiences the pleasure of hearing something they already agree with, so their complacency isn't challenged. Such poems change absolutely nothing and don't urge anyone to do anything. Their perpetrators would be horrified to know that they are really an assertion of the status quo.
The essays in the New York Review of Books are all about the satisfaction of being done with the subject. Thank God that's settled. I don't have to think about that anymore.
His brow was never furrowed by the plow of thought. Latin is magic. The word spell, meaning to list the letters of a word, is the same as spell used in casting a spell. To have access to reading was to have the power of magic. Every book a grimoire. It said that hocus pocus derived from hocus corpus meum. Derived. River.
Sometimes I don't need to go someplace. I can just send this shirt.
I can just send this hat.
My writing is extremely varied, but the task is not to unify these variations. The task is to find a structure which can contain them all. The task is not to lose any.
Yeats turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer, is not what is usually interpreted it to be, an image of chaos. It's an image of escape. The falconer is trying to bring the bird's soul down to earth where everything is a horror. It's the only moment in the poem where Yeats suggests another way, an alternative to the way of the beast.
God creates ex nihilo out of nothing. There is no world until God creates it. The poet's creativity is not like that. The poet inhabits a world which is always impinging upon him or her. The poet creates from that world, not from nothing.
For this reason, the poet's creativity is significantly different from God's. It is closer to that of the jazz musician, who is always reacting to something given, a set of chords, a tune. But this notion of goddish creativity has a secret consolation, a secret pleasure. It expresses the desire to forget what I have just said, to imagine oneself as godlike, without precedent, without history. Poet, be like God, wrote Jack Spicer.
The primary insight of the now defunct, not wholly unlamented 20th century is the perception that some parts of the mind don't know what other parts of the mind are doing. What kind of poetry emerges out of a notion of the mind as multiple, as simultaneously open and closed to itself?
It's not that great to turn 70, but you get a good word, septuagenarian. Octogenarian, if you make it to that, is good too.
The myth of the individual, of personal singular experience, seems to be finally dying, thank the loud, though it is an extremely slow, complex dying. What new myths, what new forms of expression are possible for us? Do new myths, new forms of expression necessarily involve violence?
No man is an I.
No woman either. Speaking of his film, Natural Born Killers, the movie director Oliver Stone said, "Violence? I'm against violence, but did you expect me to make a dull movie?"
She stood before me with a smoking gun, looking down at her husband's dead body. I didn't do it, she said. I believed her.
What happens is not that there is the book and there is ourselves as individuals and they are in a relationship. What happens is that we enter the field of language.
Language generates a world in which it is the primary event, in which it postulates reality. The power of rhetoric is that it creates an area which depends upon its own contexts, its own connections. Though we may respond to a book about fathers with thoughts about our own father, or a book about mothers with thoughts about our mother, that is not the primary thing that is happening to us. What is happening is that we're being pulled into a world that is deeply and essentially not this world. And we enter into it happily in order to escape what is precisely our individuality. All rhetoric is fiction. All reading is empathy and escape.
I enjoy writing between the lines, lines other people have written.
Jesus, as Henny Youngman, take me, please. I tell you, he was the first Jew to do stand-up. Behold thy mother, yuck, yuck, yuck.
Mrs. Nussbaum writes a book. Ah, Mrs. Nussbaum, I understand you have written a new book.
Have I written a new book, Mr. Allen? I have written a new tome. My husband, Pierre, says he should put it next to the door to stop the door.
A doorstopper, eh, Mrs. Nussbaum?
You shouldn't drop it on your foot, Mr. Allen.
Is it next to the bed for bedside reading?
This book is not only next to the bed, it almost is the bed. Pierre put a blanket on it and got in. He finally got to sleep at chapter 6.
Well, we'll be looking for it in the bookstores, Mrs. Nussbaum.
They are giving away with it a free blanket. Arrivederci, Mr. Allen.
Gratitude to Gershwin for that moment of utter magic, guiding me, a child, with his consummate mastery into the deepening dark.
The Living Air for Susan Landauer, 1958 to 2020.
No life, no matter how long, is ever complete. The chaos we defy daily has to win in the end. No thought, no matter how deep, is ever finished.
You loved art and spoke of it with great eloquence. You loved laughter and sought it out.
No one can say you failed to make a difference. No one can say your life was without meaning.
The words I recorded in 1996 echo in my mind and will echo until my own passing and perhaps beyond.
No mind as good as yours, no thought as deep, ever vanishes entirely. You touch those who may not even know they were touched by you.
The ocean gathers all its entities, living and dead, and moves deliberately on into the living air.
For John M. Bennett, born 1942.
I sailed on the sloop John B. Ooh, we capsized, baby. And look what we found. All the fishes, all the fishers of the deep blue sea. Oh, another poet who thinks Yeats couldn't tell a great-rooted blossomer from a tree. Yeats lasts, but at the expense of people understanding his work. Immortality is yours, dear poet, but no one will know the strangeness of your heart. But no one will know the strangeness of your heart. That's rap talk. If you wonder about some of the things I say and would like to argue with them, feel free. I'm open to argument. I realize that there are things in that poem that are questionable, but and there are also things perhaps that no one has said before, I hope. This next poem is a little straighter, and it's a solo. It's called The King, the Prince, the Poet. And I read it at the celebration from Michael McClure, October 20th, 1932 to May 4th, 2020. The prince is dead, defender of Wales. It didn't seem possible. The great one who read his work at the most famous of all San Francisco Reading Six Gallery, 1955. The one who voiced his poems to the marvelous melodies of Ray Manzarek, from whom Janis Joplin stole the song. The one who told me people who wear black are in mourning for themselves. The king is dead, the one who survived everything and lived to sing of it. The one who spoke Chaucer in the original so that people might know where our language came from. The king, the prince, the poet who rose from Wichita and embodied San Francisco, who called to the birds near his home, who answered, we were making, he told me, the myth of ourselves. He survived so much, it seemed likely that death would make an exception in his case. No, he did not have coronavirus. But this wonderful man is gone from us. His angel weeps. Her name is Amy, and she will forever be his love, his partner. And there was another who loved him too. Dear angel, whose wings will have to fly in a different way to find him now. I love them both and learned from them. She survives to build a world around herself in which Michael forever is and isn't, while she goes on. May she fly as she always has, with sweet, compassionate dignity. May her delicate hands build figures, embodiments that live forever, as Michael's words will live forever. There is a world that does not die. The muses weep. The animals are clamoring, the deer, the hawks circling, the squirrels, all the inhabitants of the zoo, the lions in the San Francisco Zoo. They're all making noises. The monkeys howl, dogs and cats in the streets, the incredible coyotes strolling in the city, the fish, the whales, even the tiny things, the ants, the bugs, mosquitoes, everything, even the living trees that bend to the wind near the water, the ocean, the sand, the monkeys. They are all muttering or crying or howling outright. And the animals that are people, the mammal nation. All these creatures know, they clamor, they complain in the old sense that the poet McClure is gone, though they cannot tell you where. Old poets are not like old soldiers. We do not fade away. We die, and more of us daily. Yet words come, bidden, unbidden, in every possible way, and the lust for freedom, not for ourselves alone, but for the community, for others, so that when the darkness comes, we can at least say we did not welcome it, that we were never half in love with easeful death, but always against it, always at odds with whatever sought to limit life, though we knew we were nothing more than leaves in a windstorm, pebbles on the shore of a vast, unforgiving ocean that brought us, with innumerable others, into this rage called life. Good travels to Michael McClure. It's my elegy for Michael. This other one is, this next one is yesterday wrote. I won't give the background to it, but you'll recognize at least some of it. It's called Father of Otters. And it's a line from Finnegan's Wake, and otters is authors, of course, a pun on authors. Two otters appeared in the post today, and both gladdening my head and my heart. Oh, one said, one great part of every human existence is passed in a state which cannot be rendered sensible by the use of a wide awake language. And the other, a soldier, said how easy it was to make a ghost, and how much profit I take by the two as I sit in my rarely wake. And another, an otter, writes that he is feeling the dark presence and wishes to make a final declaration, an end book, before he too falls to the common fate. What rhymes will waken the spirit shaken, the soul that sits by the dark water, where the simpering, shadowy boatman asks, do you have your money? And no one fails to pay. We're going to conclude with a double voice poem called Christmas 2021. I don't mention coronavirus. The complexities of Christmas, the sense of giving, the sense of buying, the transformation of everything as the snow falls, the child tended in the manger, the magic of a man appearing in your house, not to steal, but to give. Santa, like Christ, is the good thief. All of childhood summed up in those moments of gratitude and greed, of magic and splendor, when your wishes are met by the fantasy of goodness, and a savior who for the moment is a living child. Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
That's our reading. Thank you very much. Thanks, Joyce, and thanks, folks, for listening.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Sangye Land, Jack Foley, Deborah, Bachels, Schmidt, and this has just been a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Please check out our beautiful online bookshop set up for us by our co-sponsor, Mo's Books, and support independent book selling this season. And you'll find that the service is good, and it's very easy to deal with. It's very, very easy. Anyway, it's bookshop.org/lists, LISTS/poetry-flash-readings. And if you lose track of it, go to one of our event pages on Facebook. And it's also in event write-ups on the poetryflash.org site. And for Deborah's book, her wonderful new book, Stumbling into Grace, please go to the Orchard Street Press site, and you'll find it under new publications, and you'll find that link also in the chat box. So thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.